15 years ago, my wife and I came home from church, opened our front door, and stepped into a soggy, wet carpet. We had a major leak from the upstairs floor, and during the day it drained down onto the main floor and soaked a good portion of our downstairs, including floors and walls, ruining whatever lay in its path, including drywall. So we began the arduous task of an insurance claim the next day, and for the next week we were in doubt about whether we would be covered for the loss. It was an extremely frustrating experience, as anybody listening to this would testify to. If you've ever dealt with an insurance company, you would know. The worst part of the situation was not knowing if we were going to be covered. Finally, after much discussion with the insurance company, including a very lengthy interview, they actually decided to cover it. Yes, I was shocked, and still kind of am to this day. They ruled that they would pay us $5,000, but it would be up to us to get the repairs done with that money. Now, I'm no handyman, but my family is, and I knew right away that it would come close to $5,000. So in the end, we actually had extra money after all the repairs were done. So all the doubt and all the worry at the beginning melted away, and in the end, we were covered. Now, I know it's not like that with everybody, but it is funny how a bad situation like that can be so stressful, and sometimes in the end, it actually works out okay. But you wouldn't think about that in the beginning. So, what in the world does my story have to do with youth gangs from the New York City? Or how about this? What does it have to do with the Red Wings gang, specifically, from East Harlem? Well, when I learned the story of Joseph, or Joe, the subject of this video, he was a member of the Italian Red Wings in East Harlem. When I read his story, I was reminded of my own. I kind of wonder if you're going to see the same thing when you hear this. On February 18, 1958, at 9:20 p.m. on 116th Street between First Avenue and East River Drive in Manhattan, 4 Red Wings were hanging out together, and they are up to no good. A taxi cab cruised past them, driven by Harry German. The boys hailed the taxi cab down and asked German to drive them to 106th Street. So Harry drove his charges to their destination, and when it came time to pay, one of the Red Wings brandished an imitation pistol and robbed the working man of his money, and threatened him that if he didn't comply, that "I'll blow your brains out." Harry German had no choice, so he handed $28 to the boys, as well as the car keys, which they also demanded. Now, one of the Red Wings there, his name was George Clemente, said, "Knock his brains out anyway." But some semblance of sanity thankfully existed, and one of the other Red Wings refused, and they said, "No, we got the money." And so with that, all 4 Red Wings took off from the scene that they created, and they made their way north on East River Drive. Unfortunately for them, they ran past a patrolman from the 23rd Precinct who was on foot patrol that evening. Now, he managed to collar Joseph, one of the Red Wings in the group of 4, and by the very next day, the police had nabbed the other 3 boys who were involved in the taxi robbery. All 4 boys were members of the Red Wing Tots, which was an Italian gang in East Harlem that had a very long and established reputation. For instance, in 1954, the Red Wings gang was involved in murdering a Fordham Baldy in the Bronx. That kind of gives you an idea of what these guys are like. One of the detectives assigned to the case said that all 4 gang members were remorseful, but he described them as being 4 jerky kids. And he called the youngest of the 4 a bit of a psycho. Joseph, or Joe, the subject of this page, he's a little bit different. He was born in 1941. Joe lived on East 105th Street in East Harlem with his parents, and he was a good lad, running about, playing with his friends, and attending school. He was well regarded by his teachers, and he caused no trouble for his parents. His dad worked for Union Settlement, which was an organization that worked with kids in East Harlem, allowing them a healthy outlet for constructive activities, especially preventing gang violence. Both Joe's parents were engaged and interested in his well-being, and they cared for him and his 2 brothers. Joe came from a tight-knit family, which is unusual because I have found that often gang members came from single-parent family homes. This was not the case with Joe. So the question then comes up, how did young Joe get involved in the Red Wings gang? How did it come about that he is robbing a taxi driver with some buddies? Remember, this was a boy who never gave trouble to his parents and he did well in school. In fact, Joe was actually interested in going into the accounting field, and one of his teachers said, and I quote, he was outstanding in dependability and courtesy. So, how did it happen? His mother, first of all, was very tense and afraid of what kind of scandal it would bring to the family. His father didn't seem too perturbed. He was a diligent man who provided for his family and worked in maintenance at Union Settlement, which I had mentioned. So Joe's slide into delinquency started rather innocently. In the mid-1950s, the New York City Housing Authority took over large areas on the south side of East 104th Street in front of the Union Settlement, as well as on 106th Street. They demolished both areas, and the friends and families that Joe knew were forced to move. In fact, nearly all of them left the neighborhood, and so the families that Joe and his family knew for 2 decades were gone. In fact, Joe had only one friend remaining in the neighborhood, and Puerto Ricans who were migrating into this new area carved out by the housing authority did not interest Joe. And so Joe gravitated up to the area of 116th Street, which was still strictly Italian, and where La Guardia Memorial House was, which is another center for kids to hang out at. And it was here that he made his new friends. By now, he was hanging out 10 blocks away from home, and his parents did not know who his new friends are or even know what their son was doing. Whereas before, he just played out on the streets near their home under the closeful eye of his parents. The old adage of you are who you hang out with is so true. And with this new neighborhood, Joe got tangled up with the wrong crowd. This is where he met members of the Red Wings, and he became a member of the Tots. Now, Joe was a follower. He was not a leader in the gang, and so he went along with whatever the guys wanted to do. Up to that point, he never caused trouble to his parents, remember? And he also didn't get into scrapes with the law. But now, with this new set of friends, that all changed. On November 12, 1956, he was arrested on 116th Street and charged for breaking into a Consolidated Edison Company repair wagon on the street and for stealing tools and pipes. When he was asked about it, Joe said that he went along with a friend without knowing why. About a month later, he got into more trouble, but this time he was caught for truancy and fighting on the street in front of Benjamin Franklin High School. When Joe was arrested for the taxi cab robbery, his family was thrown into an uproar. I've already mentioned his mother was very nervous about this, and she was an excitable type, and this was particularly hard on her. But they were a close family, and this was to be of a major benefit for Joe. It was agreed that Joe would move in with an aunt and cousin in New Jersey who he was close to. Joe moved there shortly after, and his aunt, who was a busy, intentional woman, watched Joe like a hawk. He could barely do anything without her knowing. But she surrounded him with love. It wasn't all rules. Now that he was out of East Harlem, away from the Red Wings, Joe settled into a more normal routine with his aunt and his cousin, and he attended a new school. He helped pay Harry German back the $28 that he stole. He got a job. Later, he actually saved up enough money to buy his own car. Shortly after he moved to New Jersey, an incident involving the Red Wings shocked New York City and hit the newspapers with the force of a monsoon. On Memorial Day, 1958, 7 members of the Red Wings gang entered Jefferson Park, which was right near the school, and found a Cuban man named Julio Ramos sitting on a bench, and they attacked him with a wine jug, slats from a park bench. They punched him, they kicked him, and then they threw a Parks Department garbage can directly onto Julio's head. Sadly, he died the next day. One of the Red Wings involved in this brutal killing was George Clemente, and he was one of the Red Wings, if you recall, involved in the taxi cab robbery. Now, Clemente was friends with Joe, and later Joe admitted himself that if he didn't move to New Jersey, he could have been there on that fateful night and facing a murder charge with the other 7 Red Wings. And so, with hindsight, while the taxi cab robbery was a stain on his record, and I believe it was a felony, Joe escaped the neighborhood because of it, and most likely escaped being involved in a gang killing. With a little time, the wisdom of your parents can be seen, as Joe saw that his parents' strictness was out of love. And like the water leak that I had, things can seem hopeless and very bad at first, but with time, it can work out in the end. Thank you very much for watching this video. I appreciate it, and I hope you have a great day.